is Kelly Sheehan. I'm the newest member of the Northern Cook Soil and Water Conservation District. I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and I'd like to thank Rick and Lori for getting this all organized for all of us this morning. The Northern Cook Soil and Water Conservation District strives to provide information, education, and guidance in the areas of conservation and wise use of natural resources. The district also provides assistance for protection of wetlands, lakes, and rivers from pollution, flooding, and erosion. The district assists communities in understanding, preserving, as well as enhancement of natural prairies, wetlands, and wildlife habitats. The district works with residents and units of government to educate, plan, implement protective measures for both soil and water resources. For everybody, please make sure you sign in at the registration desk if you haven't already. There are 3 ISA CEUs available for this conference. Please be sure to fill out and sign the CEU document before you leave today if you'd like to receive those credits. So we'll go ahead and get started today. The Northern Cook Soil and Water Conservation District Office is so pleased to have 3 accomplished speakers joining us today. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, which is Michelle Catania. Michelle serves as the research coordinator for Gateway to Tree Science at the Morton Arboretum. Our second speaker is Trisha Bethke, who serves as the Forest Pest Outreach Coordinator for Illinois. And our third speaker is Stephanie Adams, and she is the Plant Health Care Leader at the Morton Arboretum. So welcome, and Michelle, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. How does it sound? Do we have good volume? All right, thank you. All right, so this is up here now, and at the end we're going to have 15 minutes of what I've been told to never include in a talk again is touch and feel time. We can have touch and feel time all you want for 15 minutes, okay, up here at the end. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to be kind of walking around and doing this because I'm going to be picking things up a lot. If at any point in time you have a burning question and you can't wait till the end, that's fine. If it's something simple, let's wait till the end. But if it's something that is important to what I'm saying at that moment, please stop me. So I'm really excited to be here and talk to you. I kind of have this weird relationship with soil. I started as a tree person. I started in biology, and there was just something there that didn't answer all the questions I had. And then I started learning that there was this entire field called pedology and soil science, and I took a lot of soil science at NIU. I actually married a soil scientist. Thankfully, he didn't go into soil science, and he did. He works for an engineering firm. But anyhow, so here's me, and I do this, and I'm able to relate a lot of the things that I understand above ground to below ground. And now I'm focused mostly on below ground functioning and how that actually helps anything above ground. To me, a tree is woody, and that's what I have turned into. Like, it's all, to me, it really all depends on what's happening to the environment in which that tree is rooting and how that tree is rooted in and the quality of the tree that is being installed in. So being that we're in this urban environment, a lot of what I talk about is trees that we're purchasing from growers, okay? I'm not necessarily talking about trees that are growing naturally that have planted themselves. Those are 2 different things, right? Do we understand that? A tree that's planted itself at the right grade unless something happened. We tend to plant trees at the right grade, but sometimes it's not, okay? And there's other reasons for that, and that's not the focus of this talk, but I just want to put that out there, that when I'm talking about this, assume that I'm making the assumption that trees are installed at the right grade. All right, so what we're going to do is let's just review what is soil. So soil is dynamic. It's a natural body composed of minerals and organics. It has a lot of gases and liquids and living organisms in it, and it serves as the medium in which plants grow. It's a collection of the natural bodies occupying the Earth's surface. It's capable of supporting plant life. And it has properties resulting from the integrated effects of climate and living organisms acting upon parent material, which is the geology in which the soil is formed. And it's conditioned over time. Time is one of the biggest factors in soil development. So if we have very long old soils that have developed over longer periods of time, we have fairly recent soils because our glacial history that we've had. So this is just kind of a diagram showing that we do need to take this rock and we're going to weather it, and that weathering takes a lot of time. Another way of describing it is it's unconsolidated, it's weathered, it's thick, and it can be variable in terms of its mineral and organic materials. It's biologically active. If there's no biology in it, by definition, it's not soil. And it covers most of the Earth's land surfaces. And the most simplest term is it's intensely weathered geologic material. All right, so there's 5 soil forming factors. So in order to understand really what soils are, you should understand how they're formed under natural circumstances. So it's called clort or clocked. So climate, organisms, relief, parent material, and time. Relief isn't really a good term, so topography is, which is why it would be called clocked. So there's 12 soil orders that form naturally on the planet, and starting on the left is the least developed of the soils, and on the right is the furthest and most developed of the soils. Those are your tropical soils. So your oxasols, these are what we're actively destroying in the rainforest. As we hack away those rainforests, we get like 1 to 2 years of agriculture out of them because they're so poor in nutrient retention because they're so old. All those nutrients are in the canopy. Least developed soils are entosols. They tend to have a lot of intrusions happening, flooding events, a lot of these things. Our 2 main soil orders in the state of Illinois are mollisols and alphasols. Mollisols are what developed under the prairie, deep-rooting prairie plants, and alphasols up here are your eastern deciduous forest soils. So they have a different clay content, but they're very productive soils. Either way, we in Illinois have some of the most productive soils in the world. Very high carbon contents, very, very forgiving to 150 years of agriculture. Okay, we still have in our most degraded agriculture soils more organic content than some of the world's worst soils that are the best in their country. So people, that's why University of Wisconsin-Madison has one of the strongest soil science departments in the world because of where it is in the world. It's on these soil types that we're on as well. So a lot of people from around countries that are trying to, produce food for their people to eat, they'll come and study with the best at Madison. So the soils are very important. So what we have to look at is there's these layers that happen in soils, and the top is typically your A horizon. So in your idealized A horizon, you're going to have a nice tree like what's on the left. You have that moderate pore space to solid space interaction happening, about 50% solids, 50% pore space. That pore space allows you to fill with water during times of rain events, store that water. That water then becomes available to the trees or the vegetation during times of drought. So if you have a lot of reservoir to store water, you're going to get through these periods of drought better. Conversely, on the other side is compacted soils. Compacted soils have much more material in the same given volume and much less volume for pore space. If you have less pore space, you're going to have less water holding capacity, and everything starts to peel different from there. I look at trees as soil indicators. I look at any plant as soil health indicators. You look at the vegetation, and that's your first clue as to what's happening below ground. So when you have your idealized A horizon, you have decreased runoff rates, increased infiltration, which is water entering the soil. You have an increase in permeability, which is water moving through the soil. That's important too. We can't just think about water entering the soil. It needs to move through it. If it doesn't move through it, you start to get these environments that could become anaerobic. And it means that you're kind of like in a wetland condition. Not too many trees grow in wetlands, especially the trees that we're installing in these urban environments. So the pore spaces are different. We have a lot more macro pores, which are your bigger pores, which are the areas that are connected to other pores. There's a connectivity that we need between the atmosphere and the ground, and we need these larger pores in order to, give water to the plant, receive water from the atmosphere, and have that exchange. Ultimately, at the end, we have a much lower bulk density in these ideal A horizons. Conversely, everything is different on a compacted soil. Compaction is something that happens when we drive over soil, when we engineer our soils. I am not expecting us to not engineer soils to build buildings and roads. We need to now then understand this is an engineered soil that can be fixed. And it can be fixed to support trees. So now when we start talking about trees are the answer for stormwater management and all these other, they're gonna save everybody. But if the tree looks like the one on the right, I'm not sure that's gonna save anybody. If the soils are the ones on the right, I'm not sure that's gonna aid in any sort of stormwater management. So we really need to start looking at soils as part of our solution for these claims that we're just throwing out there. All right, so big trees, we all like big trees. Big trees are important to us, but big trees take time and they need to be in the right environment. This is the gateway to tree science at the Morton Arboretum. And at this area specifically, what we did was we scraped, half the trees are growing on native soil. So what there is the first two in the front and they're paired. I got bald cypress, maple, elm, and then 2 dead oaks on the other side because we, for some reason, can't grow oaks here. And it's this site. I got to investigate it. I think there's a perched water table where we're trying to go. But anyhow, so what we did was we scraped off the topsoil. We did what any good engineer would do. We scraped off the topsoil, compacted the subsoil, put a schmear topsoil back on, and installed trees. What we do know is we have ideal bulk densities for plant growth. This is a clay soil. Ideally, we're about 1.1 grams per cubic centimeter. And you start getting into these restriction zones when you're approaching about 1.5 grams per cubic centimeter. All right, so what does that mean? Look at these pictures. So we got that soil up to a bulk density of 1.7. We've exceeded the root limiting and we went to root restricting. So we took our soils that were once nice and native and healthy and we compacted them to construction levels and we grew trees in it. And now we're starting to see the differences in these trees that were planted on the same day from the same stock, same grower, same everything. Look at those bald cypress in the front on October 17th. They're a little bit different size. But then a week later, you start seeing color differences happening in all the trees. The trees on the right are responding different than the trees on the left. And the only difference here is the soil that they're grown in. So over time, we intend on seeing differences in a lot of these measurements that we've been taking on site. I take a lot of plant diameter measurements. I do this thing called SPAD, which is leaf greenness. We expect to see greener leaves on the native soil than the compacted, and a few other measurements in between. So big trees also start with the right care. So this is another compaction site. So you can see we did the same thing, but on a much larger scale. This is the project that was peer-reviewed and put into the public, and then we put a little representation of this at the gateway. So that's me at this height standing next to 2 trees installed at the same time in that same environment. We drilled holes. You know it's going to be a good day when you drill a hole with an auger and throw a tree in it and expect it to do well. That tree on the right of me was treated for 3 consecutive years with purely water. The tree on the left had water and mulch. Do you see any differences? I see some drastic differences without even looking at the data to look at it. So, just mulch. Mulching a tree is good. So going back to, like I said, there's soil quality indicators, and we really need to look at this and say, all right, what can I, if I look at the above ground, I'm like, oh, that looks terrible. Now what can I start looking at and testing for these below ground mechanisms? So they're called soil properties. There's 3 main soil properties: your soil physical property, chemical, and biological properties. Now, what does that mean in terms of people that are in this room, and how do I impact my job? So when you start looking at what are the indicator properties, so the condition is weak soil structure. Well, what is weak soil structure indicative of? Aggregate stability. It has low aggregate stability. This thing called slacking. So this is a slack test. It's simply water in a mesh screen, and you can take, this is a large aggregate, and it's touching the water. Now over time, if this is a very stable aggregate, very few sand, silt, and clay particles are going to fall off of this. If this is a very unstable aggregate, or like a pile of sand, it's going to dissipate and disappear, and it's going to fall through this screen, and it's going to pollute this water. So imagine being in a rain event with exposed soil that has low aggregate stability. You start busting up those aggregates, and you start sealing in all that pore space. That's crusting. All right, so we can use, like I said, we can use these indicators to measure soil health. They're overlapping, they're intertwined. It takes a lot of just background desire to learn these things. You can't just go out and look at one measurement and be like, I know everything that's going on here. That's naive. So we have to look at everything as an ecosystem. So they're measurable. We can quantify the functions looking at these parameters. They are very sensitive to climate and management. So when we took some of our agriculture soils and said, all right, here, we're gonna till these and we're gonna put these in a no-till cover crop, within a few years, they started seeing increase in aggregate stability, increase in organic carbon, soil organic carbon content. Everything got better on the no-till side. So really, you can see these things and you can measure them and you can go out and, there's a lot of great guides, USDA, you know, we're all paying for these things, you should download them. This is soil quality indicators, and it's pages upon pages on how to, all right, here's how to conduct infiltration tests in the field. And it's just to have a quickie job done so you can be like, well, water's not going anywhere, or water is going somewhere. Like, this is something that we should start looking more at in our sites. So this reviews a lot of that stuff, and then if you're like, well, that's not enough for me, I want to put together a kit. You can put together a kit, and they walk you through it. They walk you through how to build all these goofy things, and it'd be a cool winter project for somebody. You're like, you know, make your own soil test kit, and then you have your little container, and I'll give you some I Heart Soil stickers, and you're good to go. All right, and you're like, that's it. That's all you need is a bunch of weird stuff and stickers, and you're good. Essentially, don't go in the gray. If you go in the gray, you're in an area of bulk density that's exceeding that of root penetration, which is where we tend to be in our urban environment, okay? So when we have a clay, let's pick silt, silty clay loam or a silt loam. Ideally, I don't want to exceed 1.4 grams per cubic centimeter. When you're in that gray, you're going to start to get these deflections happening, like what happened in this root. So it got to the edge of our planting, hit that really dense soil, and spun around. And when we took that out, we ended up perfectly going outside of it, and so that's on a wall in one of our labs. I'm very proud of that thing. But really, what do these numbers mean? We're in metric, we're in science world, but in reality, 1.62 grams in a silty clay loam is 101 pounds per cubic foot. Conversely, deflections start to happen at about 81 pounds per cubic foot. So imagine carrying this, you know, I'd rather carry a 81 pound bucket, right? So imagine being a root in that same environment. This is the fancy way of doing bulk density. I mean, I have a real fancy way. This thing's fun. It's an AMS bulk density sampler. This is what so you twist this thing open, you have a slide hammer. Be very careful with this stuff. Slap this thing in. And then I could pound this into the ground, and I can collect then that steel container that's full of soil. I would cut the edges off on each side, and then essentially remove that material, air dry it, weigh it, and now I have a volume and a weight, and I can calculate bulk density. You don't need a $3,000 piece of equipment to do that. You need anything that you can calculate the volume of, right? Sharpen the end of it, calculate the volume of it, pound it into the ground with a rubber mallet and a board, and then weigh it. I'm sure you can find, maybe go into Joule, throw it on their scale, put it on their neat scale, I don't know. Figure it out if you really need to know. So there's some, back in 2013, I participated in this awesome study, and we did lots of deep soil cores throughout the entire area, all 7 counties. And so these are what natural soils look like. So you really want to kind of tell yourself, all right, what am I seeing here? Granted, there's a lot of white pins in the way. Those are our golf tees just to separate out the horizons. But you see a nice gradual change from top to bottom. The darker soils are likely your mollisols. Your redder soils are likely your alphasols. So mollisols prairie, alphasols eastern deciduous forest. So this is just like your healthy soils that we were finding. And it's just, you know, they're supportive. Healthy soils support ecosystem functioning. They aid in water storage, infiltration, carbon sequestration, the immense biological activities that happen below ground, and then, you know, productive capacity. coming from an agricultural side, that's, you know, your corn and soy output. Coming from our side, it's the quality of the tree. So I did this the other day. I said, close your eyes and envision an oak. The oak is Winnie the Pooh's oak, okay? It's never Eeyore's oak. You never close your eyes and you're like, I see the perfect oak. It's not this one. It should always be. I want you all to go out and make Winnie the Pooh trees, okay? Make something that you're actually like, we need these things to look healthier. If you go in a forest and start looking at these trees in forests, they start to resemble this, right? It's in these urban environments that we're seeing these things that are quite sad looking. I'm kind of over it. I hope you are too. One of the best things that I can offer you, and this is pretty much sums up everything that I've talked about, International Society of Arboriculture, BMP, Best Management Practices. This is Soil Management for Urban Trees. There's lots of other ones up here too. This was written by Bryant C. Sharonbrock and E. Thomas Smiley and Wes Cocker. Bryant hired me at the Arboretum. Bryant's the one that I learned most. I mean, like I said, came in with a lot of soils background, but from a natural side, and he was the one that took me to the dark side. All right, and I'm very happy to be here because I feel like it's what we need, right? We need to learn more about this stuff below ground to help above ground. So what do they have is this table, and this table is essentially what you need. It has everything you need. It's 38 pages of awesomeness. Even with a glossary in the back, but this table is your ideal range of these indicators. You keep hearing me use these word indicators. What he didn't tell you is there's soil health indicators, right? And so here's your ideal range, and then these are where you start running into problems. All right, so I think doing a site assessment is really important. You know, where are you on the landscape? Are you on the summit? Are you on the shoulder? Do you have really thin soils occur right here because of just natural slope and erosion? You have thicker soils down here, but what else happens down here? You have more water. Okay, so depending on where you are, you need to really figure it out. I understand a lot of you don't deal with these sorts of landscapes here that you see me assessing, but you have to understand that all of that concrete has kind of reduced the communication of this soil volume to this soil volume. Granted, we consider them to be outcuts, and the tree will access that soil, but it's going to take time. It has to get under all the engineering of that sidewalk, and then people are like, the tree's lifting my sidewalk. Thankfully, Niles, we grind our sidewalks, okay? We'll do that activity to reduce the tripping hazard, as opposed to lifting it and hacking roots out. I appreciate you guys for that, thank you. All right, so now let's get really into it. What's urban soil? These are some really extreme examples of urban soil, I get it. It's man-made, it's manipulated, it's produced by mixing, filling, or contamination of land surfaces. It's a bit of a different definition than that nice wholesome thing we were talking about earlier. It's a material that's been manipulated, disturbed, it's used. The physical, chemical, and biological properties are generally less favorable than natural landscape. Thank you all for that nice definition. Much more material in a given volume. So what happens with urbanization is, we're scraping off the topsoil, we're compacting the subsoil, we're going to have these sad trees. But we can do things like soil restoration mechanics that can make these environments, that can convert these environments from, engineered for building and structure, and we can re-engineer them for trees and vegetation. The most simplest way to do it would be to just use use back-breaking labor and just start ripping it open, incorporating organic matter into it. And here's my caveat. I am not saying organic matter needs to be added to every single planting hole. I don't want to get into trouble for that. I'm not saying that every time you plant a tree, you need to amend the soils. It's in highly disturbed environments where trees are failing and you have like 1% organic matter, and it's at the site of an Amazon warehouse, and it's had construction trucks driving over for 3 years straight. Maybe we need to start to actually, think this. Don't treat the planting hole. All right, organic matter is the solution to that. So what we said, what is a very popular phenomenon that happens in these compacted urban soils is that this, on the far left is a soil, it's an upland soil, but it has a very high affinity for holding water. It takes a long time for it to drain, but it's going to have a natural drainage pattern to it. We can also take that soil and really disturb it. This is the subsoil. You see that gravel layer? So what it was is the topsoil was removed in the 30s, compacted, gravel put on top, and a parking lot installed. The parking lot was there for like 50, 60 years, then the parking lot and base material was removed. Well, the contractor just removed the asphalt and left the base. Put topsoil back on. What happens in this environment, you can see the tree, there's like some tree roots, I know it's not very clear. The only tree roots were above that gravel line. Tree failure, intense tree failure. What happens is water cannot flow from those different size pore spaces, and so you start to get a perched water table. And when we broke into that, I'm standing in that hole, it smelled like I was standing in a porta potty. All right, because all I would have was this extremely anaerobic environment where all those microbes had, instead of needing oxygen microbes, they were microbes that didn't need oxygen anymore. But you know what tree roots need is oxygen. You know what all most living organisms in the soil need is oxygen. So you start to remove all these other elements and the sulfur starts to take over, and that's that smell you're smelling. So this is a really cool thing I found on the internet. Was they actually dyed some water, poured it into the ground, and then they excavated the hole to show you just how that water was unable to penetrate till it started to kind of fill that whole layer. So it's going to need that environment. This is from the University of Washington. So they took two different soil types, put them on top of each other in a clear glass, like plexiglass thing, just started adding water to the top. The entire top had to be 100% saturated in water in order for water to move through to the next layer. This is called a lithologic discontinuity in geology. It's just two different layers of stuff. Different texture classes, not in communication with each other, and they're just existing as two separate things. That top layer needs to become 100% saturated in order for that water to flow through. All right, so here's some urban soils with discontinuities in it, right? So you see that just abrupt changes happening. And some of those abrupt changes are really high up. Wherever those numbers are, that's the top of the soil, right? Bottom is on the bottom of the sheet. I mean, when you start to then have to make sure all of those layers are completely saturated with water in order for it to flow to the next, and we're getting 2-3 inches at a time of rain, we're going to start running into some issues with these upland species. And again, you start to develop these conditions, and now you're in this color chart, and it's a mess. So again, just familiarize yourself. What should natural soils look like undisturbed, and then what do urban soils look like, and then try to fix that. All right, I'm going to run through this pretty fast. So I wanted to just touch on some science that backs a lot of this. So this is the work I started doing when I was hired at the Arboretum by Sharon, Brock, and Watson. The objective was to evaluate the impact of 6 surface treatments on compacted soil. So we looked at red maple and birch. Those are 2 different dichotomies in terms of their rooting, and one of them's arbuscular mycorrhizae, the other is ectomycorrhizae. 120 trees, that's an aerial of the site. So this is what it looked like on the ground. This is a mulch plot. This is a compost plot. There were some other plots that you can't tell the difference of because the surface treatment was, indistinguishable. Synthetic fertilizer was a tree firm supplied us their fertilizer. Aerated compost tea, hardwood mulch, a biological product called PHC, compost, and then our control was water. So like any good soil scientist and tree person at the Arboretum, we scraped, we compacted, we got our soil to near compaction with we watered it, and then we drilled holes, we installed trees, we just kind of did everything that would be done in the urban environment. So we plopped the tree in the hole, and then we put those surface treatments on top of it. We did have a pit dug, and you can see this nice block. When compaction happens, it tends to be dissipated below the surface. So the numbers on the left were the original bulk densities before we started, and the numbers on the right are where we were after compaction. We were able to get our middle zone at about 20 centimeters deep. we took it from about 1.19 to 1.65 grams per cubic centimeter. We were pretty happy about that. All right, we were like, all right, we did what we needed to do. So moving on, and we have really high bulk densities down here. So we went up, a 40% increase in bulk density in that one layer. So this is us looking at that site. Compacted, it was on this side, and this side was towards the edge of a forest. So we were able to actually turn around and look at what it was like unscathed, I guess. I like soil pits. And we have a backhoe out there, we can maybe find a little spot to dig some. So when I say I've done things in the lab, in the field, I've done a lot of things. This was like 6 years straight. Every few weeks I was going out and doing something. I measured a lot of physical, biological, and chemical properties out there. A lot of this was done in the lab, samples taken in the lab, a lot of field measurements, a lot of work. Then like any good tree lover, we plucked them out of the ground and destroyed them one at a time. We needed to look at fine root biomass, coarse root biomass, rooting structure, everything else. So we slowly pulled all the trees out of the ground. All right, so what am I looking at here? I have a lot of data to look at. So again, remember our compacted, we got to 1.62. Adjacent to that was about 1.4. That was still fairly high, but this area likely had some disturbance to it already. So the top, this doesn't work. Maybe. I'm sorry. We're good. We're good. We're just going to throw it at it. All right. All right. So on the left is bulk density, and on the right is gravimetric soil moisture. They're related to each other. If you have lower bulk density, you're going to have higher storage water holding capacity to it, right? So when you're looking at what happens, so keep an eye on your compost and your wood chips, WC. Compost and wood chips have fairly low black bar lines, right? So the bulk density went down the furthest. Look at the hash lines next to it. The hash lines, oh, that's awesome. So this is your water holding capacity. So when you have a low reduction in bulk density, you have an increase in gravimetric soil moisture. Pretty cool. So what didn't impact it was our just watering the tree. You know, these are the things, just odd components that Sharon Brock had to peel out. This was back in like 2005, so a while ago. Now looking at organic matter, it makes sense that compost is going to have an extremely high level of organic matter to it because that's what compost is organic matter. Wood chips is the start of organic matter, right? So over time it's going to degrade into organic matter. And then your microbial respiration rates, that's an indirect measurement of how many microbes are in there. So what we can do is we take our soil, we can isolate it, and we do these measurements in situ with it. And so the higher respiration rates were happening in the compost wood chips. That's not rocket science, right? That is expected. You would think there'd be more microbes in something that resembles that of the forest floor. Nitrogen was much higher in your compost and wood chips. pH, we went a little high in compost pH, that's expected. That's what happens with composted materials, is they're composting, they're going to alter the pH. But our soils tend to be really good at buffering that, so it fluctuated a lot. And we had phosphorus and potassium we also looked at, so obviously compost. But really this is the key right here, is like we saw a dramatic increase in gravimetric soil moisture, which relates to soil water holding capacity, and a reduction in bulk density. Tree growth diameter, what did it do to the tree? So the solid is our acer and the hatch is the betula. So here's our water, mulch, compost, compost tea, and the biologic treatment. Much higher, statistically different growth rates for mulch and compost for my betula. The acers didn't show as much, but they didn't grow as fast. Like we had to kind of look at this as two different, species happening here. But we did have differences in treatments. Looking at, so hacking it apart, our stem, leaf, the coarse root, medium root, fine root. Look at our compost and wood chip, much bigger in our stem diameter. And this is your betula and your acer. what we found, or I'm sorry, those are differences, statistical differences, excuse me. Obviously wood chips and compost led to a bigger tree, and that's what that picture showed. Yes, sir.
How much wood chips are you putting down your standard 2 to 3 inches to the drip line? And also with the FERT, are you doing 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet? Or?
Yeah, so if you look here, so this is your mulch. It was about, I'd say it was about 4 by 4, 5 by 5. And in terms of depth was about 3 to 4 inches, and we did not remove it and add more, but we did, every year we added that. We tried to emulate what would happen in a natural, like, arboriculture field setting, like you're constantly going in and rejuvenating the compost. We didn't break it, or not, the wood chips, we didn't like rake it in or anything. The compost, that was a fresh day. Within 2 to 3 days, that compost had already worked its way in, the grass grew around it. So you started to lose those compost squares. The other numbers, you'll have to let me pull up the paper, I don't remember. So again, here's that swirling bowl, and here's me. So again, just water and just mulch. Imagine if I did mulch and compost. That'd be pretty impressive, right? So, you know, this is what Sharon Brock and Watson did. Very simple study, a lot of work, but simple, and it answered a lot of questions that were, you know, in theory. Just kind of know, this was the under the mulch soil, and this was the soil under the compost. What do you see a difference in? Structure. Very wet soil had more drainage to it, okay? So we kind of have to look at that as a thing. If your soils are very strongly structured, go ahead and put a lot of mulch on it. If your soils are poorly structured, put mulch on it, but maybe also put something that has a little bit more, or like that refined organic content to it, a compost. All right, so let's always assume that this is me in that pit with that massive discontinuity. Look at all the tree roots above it, really nothing below it, not a single worm, and not a single living organism was found in here at the eye level, okay? I did not see nothing. If something isn't popping out and scaring the crap out of you, it's likely unhealthy soil, all right? That's a good indicator as well, like how scared did you get digging? So, you know, any sort of disturbance can happen, and we can get around that. But when you have these massive discontinuities, we kind of need to come at it with more engineering. And I have a separate talk that is not being discussed today. It's called Growing Healthy Trees in the Built Environment, a review of expert remediation techniques and engineering solutions. So you can play with big things or little things. You can have all your people go out there with their things. You can drill holes. You air spade, what is this, radial trenching, here's some tilling. There's a lot of ways of fixing this stuff, and I have a lot of science to back it. Oh yeah, worms, I don't know why that came in so slow, but worms. Worms, I mean, that's the easiest thing, drill a hole, put a worm in it. And I have actually a study that shows out of Britain how effective these little soil engineers are at fixing this stuff. Again, though, if this is your problem, if you dump all the worms in the world here, I don't think that's going to fix it. This is the key to fixing this sort of thing, okay? So with that, I'll take any questions, and again, thank you.
Is growing healthy trees in the built environment, is that a paper or is that just a presentation?
That's just, so I go to conferences, I'm very lucky, they send me around to conferences, and then I see these talks from one individual, and then I go up to them like, hey, I want to talk to more people about this, and they're so excited, because they're one scientist talking about their one work, so I actually just kind of make friends with people when I go places and collect their USB stick. They just give me their whole presentation, and I get everything behind it. It's a presentation. I don't
Are you able to share that?
It is like 180 slides. It's really intense. I would prefer. Well, let's talk offline.
Okay.
We'll talk. Yes, the back.
Do you have a standard detail for a landscape island with parking lots? You know, I'll say put 1 tree in, put 2, pop it in the ground. Do you have a standard detail that we could add to engineering plans?
That's a great question. So CRTI, Chicago Region Trees Initiative, they're getting more involved in that sort of collection of information. If we want to connect, I can see what I can do for you. But that's the trajectory of where we're at, is being able to like, here's your solution. So we can definitely try working something out. But Chicago Region Trees Initiative is trying to put all this material together. I'm working with them to try and make sure that it's really good. Like I went down a rabbit hole on trying to find parking lots with really good trees in it. I have found some really great engineering solutions on the East Coast. The Arboretum has a parking lot that is really good for trees, but it also costs $1 million. I mean, that's a parking lot. I don't expect too many people to have that budget. So, but yeah, I did find some good stuff coming out of like New England.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes?
Earlier you had a site for, you had the oak trees, so you could tell it's deficient. I didn't know you could go back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's neat being in the age of, 2023, you start Googling these things and everything coming up is for pot. Because that's like the new cash crop, right? Everybody cares about that. We're not even getting people to go into this stuff. So finding one that wasn't related to that was hard. But yeah, a lot of good information out there. And again, so USDA, NRCS, they're supporting our farmers, right? They have very good information out there. Therefore, I advise you all to check out the information that they offer in terms of this stuff. It's like 2 pages of just what's aggregate stability, why is it important, what should I see if I have low aggregates? And it's 5 minutes of your time, right? Have this at your lunch table, at your office, and just start reading it. Any other questions? So these are going to be shared, so you know. Sorry, I should have started with that. Yes.
And you said these 3 guides are all available via USDA?
This I made. This is my. I
Oh,
walk
that's
around like
yours.
a clown and talk about soils. So this is online in paper form.
Okay.
But yeah, and these are listed on. There's a sheet, I believe, in your folder.
Yeah.
This is all available to you. Of course, they redid their website. It's easier. But Google search is your friend. What's the worst soil you've ever seen? Somebody.
Well,
What's that?
Gray,
Gray.
a gray mold that
Yeah. Oh yeah.
putrid and
Just like come out like a rock. Yeah. A lot of buried stuff during the Chicago fire. We buried stuff, and then now you guys are likely finding that stuff. I mean, what else were they gonna do with it, right? So it's in your tree pits.
All right, so we're now at a 15-minute break.
Yeah.
So be back at 10:15, and we'll get on to the next